The convention will be in order. The chair recognizes members of the youth and young adult ministry who will lead us in morning prayer.
O Lord, let my soul rise up to meet you. As the day rises to meet the sun, glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, and now, and will be ever. Amen.
Come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us shout for joy to the rock of our salvation.
Please join me in singing This Little Light of Mine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Don't let Satan blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Don't let Satan blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Don't let Satan blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
We believe in God, the creator of all life and beauty, who blesses our journey. We believe in Jesus Christ, who lived as a friend and savior to all he met as he traveled, and who ate the life, wept, and celebrated with love. We believe in the Holy Spirit, who rises the gentle breeze, who strengthens our brightness, who offers hope and eternal. We believe in the church, which stands as to all travelers, who bears the witness of our relations with God.
People say that walking on water is a miracle, but to me, walking peacefully on the earth is the real miracle. How will we walk in peace today?
As we turn to the task before us this day,
fill us, gracious Lord, in making faithful choices, great and small. Guide us, gracious Lord.
As we seek to notice and serve those in need,
teach us, gracious Lord. As we offer our lives to you,
hear us, gracious Lord. With our hearts ready to serve, accompany us, gracious Lord.
Our Father, in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us this time of trouble, and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen.
Lord, help us not to take offense at those who question and judge our works of mercy. Rather, enable us to pray that they too might receive the merciful calling to new life with which you have blessed us. Amen.
May the peace of the Lord Christ go with us, wherever he may send us. May he guide us through the wilderness, protect us through the storm. May he bring us home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown us. May he bring us home rejoicing once again into our doors. Amen.
Thank you to the young adults, youth and young adults of the diocese. The chair recognizes the secretary for announcements.
A reminder that all voting members of convention, both clergy and lay, should be seated at the tables inside the velvet rope. Visitors and guests must be seated at the round tables or the chairs outside the voting area. Also a reminder that all cell phones and other electronic devices should be in silent mode. When there is a show of hands vote, if you are voting clergy or lay delegate, you should have received this lime green voting card in your packet that you received at registration. Please use this card when the presiding officer calls for a vote from the floor. The polls will close at 11 a.m. For voting clergy and lay, remember that you need to vote for those people running for diocesan office at the polls in the main, outside the main exhibit area. And a reminder that Julia Bellion has withdrawn as a candidate for trustee of the diocese. Extra copies of all documents for the business session can be found at one of the registration tables. Copies of resolutions, constitution and canons, proposed budget, and so forth. Lost and found items can be taken to and retrieved from the clergy registration table. I'm also pleased to announce that the offering from last night was $2,697.
And as we know, as you remember from several announcements yesterday, the offering will be shared between our companion relationship with the Diocese of the Dominican Republic and our local refugee efforts. At this time, because they were not here when I did introductions yesterday, I would like to welcome and call attention to our interpreters for the hearing impaired, Henry Lowe and Cassandra Vasquez. Welcome. At this time, the chair recognizes Eric Travis, Missioner for Youth and Young Adults, for the Yaya report.
Thank you, Bishop. Good morning.
Good morning.
As I enter into my 7th year as your missioner for youth and young adults, I find that I not only still enjoy my job, but I'm even more hopeful and excited about what we have accomplished and where we are going. I have a sticker on my laptop that I take around with me, and it says, "God's love can't be explained, only experienced." And I use that as a mantra, if you will, for the events that we do in the diocese, so that our youth and our young adults can experience God's love. So I've made a little video that shows a little bit of what we have done in the past year. I ask you to watch it. A question I have for you is, how many of you recognize youth and young adults from your congregation in those pictures? That's a good number. That's a good number. Let's work at doubling that by next convention. We'd love to see more of your young people involved in our programs. Those are some of the events that we did this past year. And ones that we are coming and doing this coming year that I'm really looking forward to include 2 one-week mission trips to our companion diocese of the Dominican Republic. A one-week mission experience in the heart of Detroit. We will be staying at Wayne State Campus, focusing on race and diversity. We will once again be taking a bus for people who will participate in camp at Living Water Ministry, which I highly suggest you go look at their booth and sign your kids up for camp. We took 26 last year. That's just one bus. Let's fill the place. As we will also continue doing spiritual renewal retreat weekends that focus on spiritual wellness and leadership development. All of our diocesan events are designed to empower our youth and our young adults for mission and ministry, and to send them back to you in the congregations to act out that mission and ministry. This is a partnership. This is not where you just get to send them off and we'll take care of them. I would love to have them for a while, but I want to send them back to you. And so I ask, no, I beg of you to join me in this partnership. Ask how I can help you doing ministry at your church, how you can help us doing ministry on the diocesan level, and best of all, join us for the fun that we have every time. Thank you.
Eric, before you go too far, one question in particular. Could you quickly explain to us the new logo?
Oh, absolutely. Pardon me while I show you my back. So there are 4 joyful people that make up this cross. Not only do they represent the youth and young adults and priests and mentors that help make up our ministry, they also represent the 4 areas that we focus on when we are talking about ways of sharing and experiencing God's love, which is through fellowship, education, worship, and service. And that is the cornerstone of how we plan our events. Now, sometimes it seems like we do a whole lot more fellowship than service or learning, but it's all in balance, and it works out very well. I would also invite you to come to our booth to take a look at that, to talk with some of our youth and young adults who have participated, and to get flyers and more information about all of these programs. We can't have youth and young adult ministry without your youth and young adults.
And one last question.
That's why I didn't move.
Thank you. You started by telling us that you are going into your 7th year
Correct.
With us. 7 brings to mind sabbatical. Are you taking a sabbatical?
I am. I will be taking a sabbatical. I have to split that into 2 half sabbaticals next year. And we'll take a 6-week sabbatical in January and February, and then take another 6-week sabbatical in November and December. Don't worry, things will still happen, but not with me.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
At this time, the chair recognizes the Reverend Canon Robert Altop for the report of the Committee on Constitution and Canons.
Thank you, Bishop Gibbs. The Committee on Constitutions and Canons has one proposed amendment to the canons this year. You should have received a blue sheet, I believe, in your pre-conference materials that provides you with this proposed change. This relates to the temporal affairs of the cathedral. Just by way of background, technically, the canons have indicated in the past that the temporal affairs of the cathedral were overseen by the parish of the church as well as by this convention. Practically speaking, that would be incredibly difficult to do. So the way the cathedral and the chapter has run is that if there needs to be a change in a meeting time, a change in a committee, we have not called all of you together to approve that. Rather, between the leadership of the bishop and the church, and then, of course, the chapter itself, the day-to-day affairs have been maintained. So this proposed change is to really put the canons in line with the way things have really always run, if you will. So the proposal is that the temporal affairs of the Cathedral Church of St. Paul, a Michigan corporation, are the mutual responsibility of the diocese and the cathedral parish, exercised through the cathedral chapter, except for those specifically reserved to the cathedral parish, as specified in the canons and the corporation's bylaws. So I move that this amendment be adopted.
Is there discussion? While it is difficult through these lights to see if anyone's coming to a microphone, I don't think I see anyone coming to a microphone. Therefore, all in favor, please raise your voting cards. Thank you. All opposed, please raise your cards. The amendment passes.
And that wraps it up for the report of the Committee on the Constitutions and Canons.
Why, thank you, Canon Altop. At this time, the chair recognizes Mr. Rob Sherry, Chair of the Mission Budget Committee, and Mr. Mark Miliotto, Treasurer of the Diocese, for the purpose of presentation of the 2016 diocesan budget and the proposed 2017 formula for congregational support of the mission and ministry of the diocese. Rob and Mark.
Thank you, Bishop. That's first time I've been up here. Next slide, please. I'd like to recognize the Mission Budget Committee. Without them, this job would have been extremely hard. If you are here, please stand. The Reverend Linda Carter from Grace, Steve Chisholm from St. Clement's Easter, Claudia Hamlin from St. Paul's, the Reverend Karen Lewis from St. Paul's, Mark, he's already standing. He's from St. John's Royal Oak. The Reverend Juan Perez, and my Spanish is terrible, and I'm not even going to try, in St. Stephen's, Detroit, and of course myself from St. Thomas, and our staff support, Joanne, she's way in the back. Hi, Joanne. When we sat down to look, the next slide, please. When we sat down and set our goals and priorities for this budget, we wanted to present a balanced budget. We wanted to gather our information from the budget hearings and evaluate suggestions that we got from those hearings for the inclusion into the budget. We also wanted to maintain a transparency in the process for reporting. One of the major goals was to fully fund the ministry developer position, COLA for the staff, and we wanted to consider funding a new part-time position in the accounting department of the bishop's staff, and finally to reduce or eliminate the reliance on our reserves. Next. Good. The good news, to do this, we have the apportionment pledges for 2016. I want everybody to shake the hand of the person next to them. We had 100% participation. Every congregation has made a 2016 pledge of support. That's amazing. And the good news is the full apportionment pledges are now over 71%. As you can see, 54 of the 76 congregations have pledged at full apportionment, and that has gone up from the 63% in 2014, 63 in 2013, 65% in 2014, and 67. So that is a trend line that is great to see. And the best news is the shortfall from the full apportionment keeps dropping. For 2016, it's only 144,000, and that's 8.4%. 2015, it was 177,000, which was 10.3%. In 2014, it was 209,000, which is 12.5%. Again, I think we should give all of ourselves a round of applause for that. As I sat looking through this next slide, I considered reading every congregation, but as you can see, we've had full apportionment pledges from Christ Church in Adrian to Christ Church in Dearborn, All Saints in Detroit to St. Peter's in Hillsdale, St. John's in Howell to St. John's in Plymouth, All Saints in Pontiac to St. Luke's in Ypsilanti. And again, it's a wonderful thing to see as the chair that when everybody does give, it helps a lot. At this point, I'll give it over to Mark so he can give you the number crunching.
Thanks. Good morning. I want to invite you to pull out, there's a yellow packet in your convention materials. It says operating budget on the cover. You may want to follow along there. You could also follow along in the slides. The primary page we'll be looking at in this yellow document is page 1. This is the summary of the budget. The following pages after that show all the detail. And then page 5 shows the budget organized by program area. And then following that is some narrative. But for the sake of this discussion, we'll be looking primarily at the summary page. So before we get to the budget, though, I'd like to take this opportunity always to look at the prior year. This is the first opportunity to show this to this body, the prior year numbers. And again, as has been the case for the last several years, we have good news to share from 2014. We did grow our operating revenues by about 1.7%. We achieved our targeted, our budget on revenues. Our expenses were a little bit under budget. And we ended with a small surplus, net operating surplus of about $5,000 in 2014. You can see those numbers on that yellow sheet, that first column of numbers. You see we ended with a surplus of $5,544. So great news from 2014. So if we can move on now to 2016, the highlights. So there were a couple of things that impacted the funding that mission budget had to work with in developing this budget. And the first thing, as many of you may know, there was a change in the assessment to the Episcopal Church that every diocese pays to the Episcopal Church. A change approved at convention for the last triennium. The formula had been the prior year income times minus $120,000 exemption times 19%. What was approved for the next triennium was that the exemption is going up to $150,000, And the rate eventually is going to drop to 15%. It's going to be done in stages. In 2016, it'll be 18%. So it's going from 19% to 18% for 2016. So the combination of the drop in rate, the increase in the exemption, meant about a $20,000 savings on our budget that we got to, the mission budget was able to redirect in other areas in the budget, which is exactly what was intended from this change in the assessment. The other thing, as Rob said a few minutes ago, apportionment pledges are up. In dollar terms, it's about $35,000 of additional funding that we're able to apply in the budget. So the highest priorities, as Rob said, number one was fully funding the ministry developer position, and I am pleased to say that with this proposed budget, we are able to do that. This has been, yeah. This has been a couple of years in coming. The 2014, we were able to fund it at a 25% level. This year, it's 50%, and what we're proposing for 2016 is 100% funding. Cost of living adjustments, we are able to propose cost of living adjustments for the staff. This year, 2015, the staff did not get a cost of living adjustment. We did not have the room in the budget. For 2016, we are proposing a 3% number to help offset the fact that this current year there was no adjustment. Okay, so here are the numbers. You can see the apportionment pledges going from about $1,515,000 up to $1,550,000. That's a $35,000 increase, about a 2.3%. I do want to point out we do have an allowance for shortfall every year. There's a small shortfall from what the pledges are, so we budget for that. And we actually haven't gotten to 1.8% on the shortfall in several years, but we continue to budget at that sort of level. So we have 1.8% built into the budget. The dividends and interest, it looks kind of quiet here, $483,000 to $485,000. Not a big change, but there's a lot going on there. The trustees, most of the money coming from here is in the Growth and Income Fund, and the trustees approved a change in the dividend rate for 2016 going forward, a drop from 4.5% to 4.25%. And an extension of the way they do the formula from 3 years to 5 years, which meant a lower dividend for every investor in the Growth and Income Fund. What's happened for us is our balances have grown over the last couple of years enough to help offset the drop in that rate. So our dividends and interest here are basically flat from 2015 to 2016. We're not expecting much change in contributions. That number is pretty much flat as well. We're actually going a little more conservative here at $225,000. And then transfer from reserves. As Rob mentioned early on, one of our priorities was to reduce or even eliminate our reliance on reserves. And I can say here that we have almost eliminated. We're cut that by 81%, where you need only $7,000, and that is to fund half of the part-time accounting position that we are proposing in here. So we've got total operating revenues, we'll round this up, $2,265,000 this year, going up to $2,268,000 in 2016. For those of you who prefer to look at charts rather than numbers, we've got a decade of activity here. This is operating revenue for the diocese over the last, going back 9 years plus 2016 to get for a full decade. Obviously, the numbers at the beginning part of this decade were the highest, peaking at about $2,470,000. The recession hit in 2009, and you see a big drop-off there. In revenue in 2009, and it was kind of flat for a few years, and it bottomed out. not sure if you can see this on the graph, but it bottomed out in around 2011, $2,119,000. And since that point, it's been slowly increasing, arrow moving in the right direction, if you will, up to 2016. And we're now proposing, as I said just a second ago, roughly $2,270,000. And as we'll see for 2017, we think that number could top $2,300,000. So we've got a nice trend line here on our operating revenue. All right, so let's spend a few minutes on operating expenses. You'll see the numbers up on the slide. You could also follow along on your yellow sheet. The first thing I want to say is the Episcopal Church assessment, down $20,000. You'll see that here. It rolls up in a category called denominational support, $369,000. The budget for that category last year was $389,000, so that's where you see the $20,000 drop. On the salaries and benefits line, there's several things going on here that I do want to point out. We've got the ministry developer position now fully funded. That was about $31,000 to bring the rest of that position fully funded into the operating budget. We have the 3% cost of living adjustment, the COLA for staff. That was about $23,000. And then we learned in September that our health care premiums are going up 9%. Again, that's 2 years in a row, 9%. If you recall from last year, when that 9%, the first increase came in, we established a cost sharing with the employees, whereby in previous years we were fully funding whichever plan our employees chose, and most of our employees were choosing the richest plan. What we started in 2015 was to say that we will fund the 90/70 plan, which is the second tiered plan, and if employees wanted to buy up to the better plan, they could, and most of our employees did. And to give you a sense of that, for a family plan, that's about $92 a month for the employees, and for a single, it's about $33 a month that our employees are sharing in that. What we decided, what we're proposing here, is that we not adjust that for 2016, that we leave that in place. We continue to fund the 90/70 plan, and if employees want to buy up, they can. It's a slight increase for the family, goes from $92 to $101 a month that they're sharing in the cost of that health care plan. And for a single, it's a smaller increase from $33 to $36. But we realize that going forward, especially if we continue to see increases in the 9% range, we've got to look at that again, and we'll be looking for employees to, we'll be looking at revising that plan and asking our employees to share a little more in those increases. Let's look at social justice and advocacy grants. This rolls up in a category here called grants and partnerships. We were able to increase the line items here. These are our outreach line items. We're able to increase them about 2.5% in this budget. If you wanted to look at the detail in those yellow sheets, you could see that on, I believe it's on page 4, you'll see the breakout of grants. So the advocacy ministry is going up from $18,545 to $19,000. It's about 2.5% increase. And then the social ministry grants from $57.93 up to an even $52,000. Again, about 2.4% increase. So we were pleased to be able to do that. There were some other minor changes in categories. The biggest changes didn't affect the bottom line, but they were merely moving dollars from one section to another, moving some budget in the equipment up into office expenses related into the way that we changed the way we do our copying in the office. We moved some money out of communications up to what we thought was a more appropriate line in office expenses as well. So just some shifting around of numbers from one category to another, and a couple other minor adjustments here and there, but for the most part, these were very small. So we've got total operating expenses proposed $2,268,000. This year, 2015, the budget is $2,265,000. So it's only about a 0.2% increase. But remember, we've also got that $20,000 reduction in our assessment to the Episcopal Church. All right, one more graph to look at. These are the operating expenses over the last decade. Again, as in the other slide, the first 3 years of this decade are the largest of this period, peaking at $2.76 million in 2008. But I do want to point out also that in those years we did have deficits for 2007, 8, and 9. Starting in 2010, a big drop-off in our operating expenses, and that's the point where we started having surpluses, or at least small surpluses. But it bottomed out at $2,054,000 in our expenses. You can see a nice trend line from that point forward. It's averaging about a 1.7% increase per year since 2010, and even more over the last 5 years. That's about a 2.5% increase per year. If we were to put 2017 on here, we're expecting that number is going to be up at a similar kind of number too. So some good numbers on this graph. One more graph to look at. We've got a pie chart. Ooh. If you want to look at the numbers on it, on page 5, you'll see it says 2016 proposed operating budget by program. That's where the numbers come from that fill this. This, I thought, was just a good way to look at our operating budget by the different programs, the functions, you know, in the corporate world, we might call these the cost centers, the areas that, how we divide up our functions within the office. Interestingly, the largest wedge here is the church-wide mission support at 17%. That's the biggest number there is the assessment to the Episcopal Church. The next largest would be the episcopate. This is things related directly to the bishop's office and our canonical sort of things, you know, the things that are necessary to call ourselves Episcopal. And then you could go around and see how some of the others numbers work. I'll point out the sort of pink and purple numbers, if you will, starting with Episcopate General down to church-wide mission, roll up into a category we call episcopate and canonical. The more green colored ones we think of as our mission program. The purple ones off to the left would be our mission partnerships, and then we've got the mission support are the orange wedges off to the upper left corner. So anyway, just a different way of looking at our operating budget. And then a peek at 2017. Because of the way that our diocesan apportionment is calculated, we know we've got somewhat of a sense of what 2017 might look because it involves 2 years of history, 3 years, and we know 2 of those years. So we can make a pretty good guess at what the number is going to be for 2017. Dividends are a similar thing. We can make a pretty reasonable estimate about how that's going to turn out. So we think at this point that our operating revenues will grow about 1.7% in 2017. We do expect that with that increase in revenues, we'll be able to fully eliminate our reliance on reserves. As I said a few minutes ago, we do think we'll need to look at healthcare cost sharing in a new way. The assessment to the Episcopal Church drops to 16.5% in 2017 before going down to 15% the year after that. And then we're thinking maybe 2% increases in most of the other line items. You can see those numbers again in the yellow handout for 2017. It's the column to the far right. And, one other thing I want to say, this slide presentation, there are copies available. At the next break, they'll be at the registration table if anybody wants to see any of this. And if anyone wants an electronic copy, I'd be happy to share that. Just call me or email me at the office and be happy to send that to you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rob, our Chair of Mission Budget.
Thanks, Mark. As everybody loves pie. I'd like to present the 2016 budget resolution. The Diocesan Council offers the following resolution. Resolved that the 2016 operating expense budget of the Diocese of Michigan be in the total amount of $2,268,163, and be it further resolved that the Diocesan Council shall have the authority to adjust the adopted budget in keeping with the income insured from pledges received and from other income.
Is there discussion? Coming to microphone 2.
Good morning, Bishop, fellow delegates. Dennis Lennox, St. John's, Detroit. I'm not rising to speak against the budget, but I did have a brief comment specifically regarding communications and public relations element of the budget. I fully recognize that communication mediums have changed as we transition to digital communication, so costs are lower, but seeing, I think, 21% reduction, somewhere around there, 22% reduction in communications and public relations, I think that sends the wrong message moving forward, considering that communications and PR should be one of the main objectives of the church and the diocese. And I would like to see in future years at least a consideration to increasing that, or if there's any supplemental amendments to that budget later this year, if there's increases possible. I do think a greater emphasis needs to be placed on that, particularly when elements like social justice, for example, are being increased. I think communications and PR should be integral to that process to support those other increases as well. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I can assure you that there were no changes made to communications without consultation with the Director of Communications, and that's all within his estimation of what it would cost to run his department. So,
yeah. May I add one thing to that? One thing to point out is that there was, I want to say it's about a $10,000 number that historically had been in communications related to the postage for the production of the distribution of the record. We decided to move that postage expense up into office expenses, which is where all the other postage expense is. So while it looks like there's a cut in the communications budget here, it's not really. We're just moving some expense from one category to another.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing no one else rise to a microphone, all those in favor of the 2016 budget resolution, please raise your voting cards. Thank you. Those opposed, please raise your cards. I would note a unanimous passage of the budget. Thank you. At this time, I would like to recognize the Reverend Terry Pilarski, Rector of Christ Church, Detroit, for the purpose of reporting on a conference where she represented our diocese in conversations about resettling refugees from Syria in southeast Michigan. Terry? Oh, sorry, Christchurch, Dearborn. I knew that. I wanted to make sure you all were listening.
There you go. Good morning. Can I help? This was a desperate question asked of me by a refugee resettlement agency some 10 years ago. A family of 6 was scheduled to arrive within 24 hours, and the house they are going to live in had not received clearance from the city inspectors. The family, a mother, 4 kids, and a grandmother, were refugees from Rwanda. After years in a refugee camp in Cameroon, they'd been transported to the Sudan, where they were en route from Paris and then to Chicago, a 36-hour, give or take, trip. The church and I have been participating in refugee resettlement for a couple of years at that point, and we decided that we could house this family for a few days in the church. It was summer, there was no Sunday school, and the church building was mostly unused. We set up 6 beds in one long Sunday school room. Next door was a living room-like room with a TV and sofas. Downstairs was a fully stocked kitchen and bathrooms with showers. In short order, we had everything ready, including food in the refrigerator. The family arrived along with the staff from the resettlement agency about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. After the trauma of the refugee camp and the challenges of travel, the family was nearly catatonic. Over the next week, though, the church was filled with the sounds of a family coming back to life. Kids playing outside in the playground, food being prepared in the kitchen, and faces that began to smile, and eyes that shone from rest and hope. By the end of the week, the agency had the house ready, and the family moved on. But the members of that church who'd opened their doors were forever changed. Come, you that are blessed by God, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Who is the stranger? Did you know that there are some 60 million forcibly displaced people in the world, and the number is growing daily? Forcibly displaced people fall into several categories. You can put the first slide up. IDPs, internally displaced persons. About 40 million people have been forcibly uprooted and displaced within their own country due to violence and conflict. They remain in their country, but not in their homes. They are not protected by the government and have no access to resources. Asylum seekers. In 2014, some 1.66 million people submitted applications for asylum. Therefore, potentially, an even larger number of people are waiting to make it through the legal system in order to apply for asylum. Asylum seekers are at a distinct disadvantage in that they have 0 resources available to them. A number of agencies focus solely on housing asylum seekers, such as Freedom House in Detroit. The criteria that grants one asylum are: you cannot return to one's home country because of a real risk of being killed due to one's race, religion, ethnicity, politics, or because one is a member of a particular group, such as the LGBTQ community. And I just read that there are women in South America who are receiving this special status if they're in a marriage that they can't get out of. Refugee. A refugee, these are legal terms. A refugee is someone who has been forced out of their home and country because of a real risk of death and violence. There are about 20 million refugees in camps around the world today, and I bet that number has grown even higher with the Syrian crises. Most refugees today are fleeing Syria, followed by those fleeing Afghanistan, as well as Africa, South and Central America, and other countries in the world that are experiencing conflict. Refugee resettlement is a long, arduous process. A number of international agencies, often affiliated with the United Nations, work with the governments and have created refugee camps with the intent of resettling as many people as possible. Each person considered for resettlement undergoes intense background checks, health, and psychological evaluations. Refugee status can take years to acquire and even longer to receive the needed approval to resettle in another country. Migrants, a term used frequently. Any individual who crosses a border into another country is a migrant. However, migrants differ from IDPs, asylum seekers, and refugees in that a migrant can still seek protection from her or his home government. Here in Southeast Michigan, the largest resettlement agency is LSSM, Lutheran Social Services of Michigan. They have partner affiliates with other agencies such as EMM, Episcopal Migration Ministries. It is anticipated that we will receive nearly 1,000 Syrian refugees beginning in about 18 months, or as soon as President Obama gives the clearance to resettle the refugees. Refugees are resettled first in countries and cities where they already have family members, if that's possible. If there are no family members with whom to be reunited, refugees are resettled in regions where they have people with whom they can form community, other people from their region or other people who are like them. Every effort is made to ensure that refugees are resettled into community. For it is with community that people are able to rebuild their lives and move from despair to hope. How can you help? Next slide. As refugees begin to move into Southeast Michigan, I, and along with representatives from the Lutheran Synod and other interfaith agencies, will receive requests from LSSM for assistance. This will be a request for immediate action, typically. A team of youth or adults to greet a refugee family at the airport. A team of people who can set up a house or an apartment, including making beds and organizing a kitchen. A team of people who can acquire new or gently used clothing or household items. A team of people who will go to the grocery store and stock the kitchen with culturally appropriate food for the family. Some churches may choose to take on a larger, more expensive portion of resettlement, such as sponsoring a family by paying for the expenses to migrate, including visas, airfare, securing the items for their new home, and so forth. If you'd like to participate in this, please email me, terry@christchurchdearborn.org. My email's up there. Also, we will send out requests for help via the Diocesan Communication Network, so look for that beginning sometime in the future. And be sure to stop by the LSSM booth in the vendors hall, where you can pick up materials on refugee resettlement and asylum seekers. Thank you, Bishop Gibbs, for your support enabling me to attend the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services Conference in Baltimore earlier this month, and for encouraging our participation in refugee resettlement. The Diocese of Michigan has a long history with refugee resettlement, and now the opportunity begins again. I thank also Christ Church Dearborn for their support and the vestry for their support, enabling me to go to the conference and to begin this ministry again with all of you. We are informed and formed not only by Jesus' words in the gospel to help the stranger, but also from Deuteronomy. We are reminded that our ancestors were once strangers in a strange land. If we reach into the resources of our corporate soul, there resides, I believe, a grief from a common loss of home, of the places of our ancestors left behind. May this grief inform our compassion and inspire us to heal the broken and the wounded with love. And may we do this with God's help. Thank you.
For those of you that we could support you, and we look forward to helping you in the coming months. Thank you. At this time, we are going to a special order of business. There will be a moderated panel discussion and table conversations. Imagining Difference Differently, Why Issues of Race, Gender, Sexuality, and Class Are All Connected and What Faithful People Can Do About It. Our moderator this morning is the Reverend Canon Bill Danaher. Our panelists are the Reverend Dr. J. Emerson Johnson, Dr. Ivy Forsyth Brown, Ms. Heidi Kim, and Mr. Darius Hillman. I would welcome them to the podium, and the podium staff is going to leave.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking part in this wonderful panel discussion that we're going to have. We are still waiting for one of our panelists. I'll probably be texting him until he comes, but that's Darius Hillman, who is the current Director of Affirmations, which is a center in Ferndale, which works with LGBTQ+ people. We've had some wonderful presentations so far by Dr. Forsyth Brown and in the sermon by Jay, which was wonderful. We're also joined by Heidi Kim, who is the National Episcopal Church Director of Racial Reconciliation. And my job is to be the moderator, but I'd like to just offer three things as to locate this panel discussion. The first is that we're going to be talking about a complex term that is known as intersectionality. And what that means is that's the layering of different ways in which systems can create and increase oppression in a society on the basis of gender or race or sexuality. And the best way for me to explain it is to explain it in terms of the way in which power gets worked out. We tend to think of power as a binary. You have people in power and then you have the oppressed, right? And that's a powerful way of thinking about things. But power is also like an electric field. It's a force field that holds people in place. And so power can have all sorts of configurations. So it's not just a government that keeps a people down, although that certainly is the case, but the social web creates situations in which people are at different levels of risk and different levels of danger in their lives. So the example that I use is I was visiting a museum which is known as the Slave Lodge in Cape Town, South Africa, with a group of students. And I saw this piano in one of the rooms that I hadn't seen on previous visits. So I went up to the piano and I took a look at it. And on the plaque behind it, it was this piano that was given by the Canadian government to representatives from South Africa, where they had visited Canada to study the reserves that they had for Native peoples in order to develop their ideas around the segregation of space in the Group Areas Act that became known to us as apartheid. And so the piano had been a moment in which the South African delegation and the Canadian representatives sang hymns together. And so the Canadians were so grateful for the visit that they gave the gift of the piano, which went back and now is in that museum. Now, the reason why I think that this is an interesting example is you see power working in a very different way. You see it embedded in structures of ideology, of religious beliefs, of practices, and you also see it operating in an almost horizontal way. Another example is I had a friend who was African who moved to the United States, and he said to me that his first impulse when he was here was, he said, "I've never received such incredible service when I went to the CVS. The manager was always right by me." And always there. And then I realized suddenly he wasn't there to serve me, he was there to watch me. So the manager is not a government representative. He's not something that he's not an officer of the law, but he is he is a manifestation of how these webs of power exist. The second thing I want to say, and this is actually, I talked about power, so I guess this is my third thing, which is that I think it's important for people who are part of the majority culture, which is myself, to be aware of how we react to conversations like this. And so Beverly Daniel Tatum, who's a psychologist and former president of Spelman College, has an interesting stage theory that I have adopted, which is that when you hear about things about race or homophobia or about sexism, you tend to have an experience of shock. And that's a normal experience. Because our whole society is built around telling us that these things really don't exist. And oftentimes that pivots around the idea of a meritocracy, right? But the second stage is then to engage in a kind of bargaining, a negotiation. So people like me will go up to a microphone and say, "Okay, but you all have done things too." Or, "We will give you this if you give us that." Well, I don't want to cast aspersion on the collective bargaining process by any means, but asking a panelist to give or trade or to sign on to any agreement is not a really good idea, but it's totally normal. It's a way of psychologically coping with disturbing news, so you want to negotiate your way out of it. And then the third stage that happens is there can be dissociation and an experience of detachment and alienation from your own majority culture, and that's a completely normal way of looking at things too. And then finally, hopefully, there is a level of commitment and a level of re-engagement on the basis of who you are, where you are. You all don't know me very well, and I look forward to being here a long time so that you get to know me. I won't burden you with any personal narratives today, but I can say to you that there's been a large number of moments in my life in which I had to confront otherness, and I learned in that moment that I had to change. And that change was risky. It didn't always bring out my best self, but I found that change incredibly enriching and powerful and transformative and more in line with what I think God is calling me to be. And I mention all these stages because all of you are going to have these conversations. Most of you will have these feelings. They come in layers, and it's important to keep aware of the different stages that you experience, not only in your own internal place, but also in terms of the people that you encounter pastorally. So without further ado, we'll turn to Dr. Forsyth Brown.
Good morning. I have a stopwatch here to watch my time. Yesterday I joked that the workshop that we had was larger than my normal classes. This is much, much larger than my normal classes. And I'm watching my time because yesterday we had 3 hours and I could have gone another hour or two, and I'm trying not to go over time today. I really thank you for inviting me here, Bishop Gibbs and Michelle Meach. This is something I've wanted to do for some time. I teach on race, ethnicity, immigration, and have done research in this area and continue to do research in this area. But I have this class, which is what the workshop was yesterday, that is called Minority Groups, where we look at issues of race, ethnicity, social class, and immigration as it developed here in the United States and set us up for the type of society that we currently are living in. Today, I'm going to kind of continue with it's a little different from what we did yesterday, and I really do appreciate your opening remarks on introducing the concept of intersectionality. That is how I was trained as a sociologist at the University of Maryland with one of the primary scholars that started the intersectionality movement. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit and give a very nice definition. I'm going to explain it a little bit further here today. But I'm also going to talk a little bit more personally, because what I decided to talk about was inclusion and invitation. I have been worshiping in predominantly white churches for about 20 years. And during this process or time, I've worshiped with Missouri Lutheran congregations, ELCA Lutheran congregations, United Methodist. We're church people, and so even when we go on vacation, we go to church. I've been at Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and Holy Trinity, Brompton, which is the home of the Alpha Course. In all of these congregations, we have been welcomed very nicely, my husband and I. But we also have had periods of time when we were seeking congregations to worship with. And because I'm a researcher, I do researcher stuff. So I use the census data to find out about different localities and areas, like who's living there, what their median family income is, what the racial and ethnic characteristics are. But also with the ELCA, that's what my husband's family was, or still is, they have this wonderful website that when you're looking for congregations, you can go on and you can click on a congregation and go into their data, where you can find out what is the racial ethnic composition of the congregation, how many people are baptized, how many people go to Sunday school, what their annual giving is, what their budget is, and it's trended over a 10-year period. So it's wonderful, rich data. So when we were picking congregations when we've moved from Maryland and here to southeastern Michigan, we would go into this data, or at least I would, and look to find out how diverse is it? What are they doing? How many people are in Sunday school? You could also, how many people have they buried? So is the church growing or contracting? And what I found was, of course, the majority of the congregations were predominantly white. There might be 10, 20 people of color, and that's all people of color. But the churches were also declining in size, declining in the amount of money that they were bringing in. And I believe very strongly in the teachings of mainline Protestant churches. I think that they are clear and focused and have a message to deliver to many people of different races and ethnic backgrounds. However, we're losing to other denominations, other faiths, who are more inclusive than what mainline churches are. It's said that Sunday mornings are the most segregated racially in the United States, and have been for many years. Of course, I had to double check that. I had to Google it just to make sure. And I came across a recent study of churchgoers that found that congregants think that their church is diverse enough, and this is a recent study. Even though the majority of these congregations, both black, white, and other, were predominantly composed of one racial group. Black churches seem to think a little bit more that they could be more inclusive, a little bit more diverse, but the predominantly white churches did not. They thought they were fine. The non-denominational churches are growing, and if you go to some of the mega churches, they are very diverse. They also have different messages. So my question for you is, why is there such a difference between what we conceptualize as the kingdom of God and our knowledge of the diversity of the human population and the diversity that we have in our pews? But better yet, I want to know, what can we do about it? What can each of us do about it? In sociology, race, ethnicity, and social class and gender, I use race, ethnicity interchangeably, are considered master statuses. Well, at least race and gender are. These statuses supersede and trump other status positions that you hold in society. Master statuses emerge from the historical development of the United States, both socially and ideologically. And race, ethnicity, social class, and gender are linked positions of privilege and power. Citizenship and voting rights, inclusion, societal disadvantages, segregation, submissiveness, exclusion are all linked to these positions. Although I'm a university professor, I have a PhD in sociology, I do lots of research, many of you may just see me as an African American woman, the PhD second. Being African American is my master status. Others may see me as a woman first. That's another master status. My status as a university professor is subsumed underneath these other two statuses. The intersection of race, ethnicity, class, and gender statuses create a web of advantages and privileges, disadvantages in our society that impact individuals differently. Patricia Hill Collins, who created this term, or was one of the founders of intersectionality, called this the matrix of domination. And she writes, in addition to being structured along axes such as race, gender, and social class, the matrix of domination is structured on several levels. People experience and resist oppression on three levels: the level of personal biography, the group or community level of the cultural context created by race, class, and gender, and the systemic level of social institutions, which would be the church. So what can we do? We have this web, we have this history, what can we do? In these white congregations that I've participated in, I've had leadership positions in some of them, and like I said, these are very warm, friendly, loving people. I was never excluded. They created welcoming environments. That's great. What they didn't do, and what they didn't understand as why they couldn't get more diverse, is they didn't invite. They didn't invite people that they work with, people that they know from the soccer team. If you're engaging on a regular daily basis with people who are racially, ethnically different from you, then these are the same people who are of your social position that you can invite to church. But we don't. People kind of fall into church, but they don't get invited to church. And if we're going to deal with this notion of being more inclusive, it can't just be creating welcoming environments. That's not good enough. That's a starting place. It's not the ending place. In employment, in higher education in particular, which I'm familiar with, universities have some similar problems. They would like to have more diverse faculties. However, they seem to be unable to understand how do you recruit minority faculty? How do you get them? So they look through applicant pools. So if you don't apply, okay, you're not part of the pool. But part of it, the more successful universities, like the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor actually, they invite, they recruit, they seek, they find, and they bring them in. And then they have very inclusive faculties. Others don't, and they wonder why they don't come. That to me is where parts of the church are. Both black congregations, white congregations, Latino congregations, we are too isolated. We're not intersecting. One of the areas that I'm very interested in is the next place. The next place for the church is with the immigrant populations that are coming in. And right now, we're creating separate congregations within the same building. We're not integrating these congregations. So I wonder what's going to happen in the future. As you know from my discussion yesterday, for some of you, I could go on and talk about lots of different other things, so I'm running out of time. But I would like to challenge you to think about who have you excluded from your consideration of being part of your congregations, and who can you invite? I mean, this week. I know I had to put that in there. Okay, thank you.
That was so rich. Thank you. We only have until 10:25, and so I do want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. So why don't we go with Heidi to come next, and we'll just go right down. You're supposed. Yeah, I know, and I was given plenty of potentiary powers to change the thing. So, do you want to go last? Then I will not go last. The next, I think, is Darius.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? So I am going to, I'm very proud of my position as a layman. I looked at the topic for today's conversation, imagining difference differently, why issues of race, gender, sexuality, and class are all connected. And I went, wow, I'm living all of them every day of my life. And the minefield of balancing it, and getting over the healing, getting through the healing and the hurt of each. I woke up this morning, and these truths were self-evident. I was blessed to be alive, so after praying, I stepped into the day, 47 years of age, 6'3", black, born and raised on the east side of Detroit, and that's an imprint that's in me and I'm proud of. gay and black informally for half of my life, low to middle income, and still doing the work to forgive and to leave room to have conversations. Most of my life, I grew up in a black Baptist church. And in the black community, with all of the attacks against our community, that was the place, the power of the black church in my community's life was undeniable. And even before I could describe or articulate what I was, it was being imprinted in me that there was something wrong with me by the place I looked for safety and comfort against a world that was attacking me for the other ways that we intersect. So my relationship with organized religion, to be very honest, is strained at best. I remember dating a man in my mid-30s. I was out to those closest to me, but I wasn't fully out yet either, because that's another issue to deal with. And one of our biggest challenges and what kept our relationship from moving to the next level, I wouldn't go to his church. I wouldn't go into the house of worship with him. And I went once, and it took the pastor exactly 5 minutes. And it was a throwaway, but it reopened every single wound. And it took everything I had not to run from the church screaming, "This is why I don't trust you. This is why I can't trust my happiness and my well-being." In spite of that, in spite of feeling in the most polarized region of the country as a black man, never quite enough, never quite accepted, been welcomed more times than I care to remember. I felt so spectacularly popular in stores. Because if I'm not in my business suit, and I'm just on the weekend with the hat flipped to the back, I'm still the U of M graduate. I'm still the first black executive director of the largest LGBT community center in the state, and one of the 6th largest in the country. I am still all of those things, but in that moment, I go back to being 15. So I spend so much of my adult life healing and rehealing. I feel like I'm in a state of recovery. But in spite of those things, my faith is stronger than ever. My faith, because what I had to do as I was working to intersect all of these things, I had to remove filters as I worked to self-heal. So I needed to remove man out of the equation between me and God. I needed to be able to hear him directly. I needed to be able to fall on my face and be able to speak directly. Am I really sinning? I've tried what the church told me to do growing up. I remember as a kid looking at the television, because I was the youngest, and I'm old enough to come from a house where there was one TV, and the youngest was the remote control. And I'm not joking. I literally remember sitting there as my mom, at that point we had divorced, and I say we had divorced, and then we changed. We went to another area of now we're poor. We're no longer working class, we're poor, and all that meant, and the stigmas that came with that. And I remember watching the television going, don't be attracted. Don't find him attractive. I wasn't even 13 yet. Willing myself not to feel what I still couldn't even identify and describe. But I already knew that my church, the place where I was baptized, the place that I went for safety, was already telling me that there was something wrong with me. I had folks of different races saying, there's something inherently wrong with you. So you do a lot of work to get through the anger, to understand that we are all human, we all have failings. And as my friend here said earlier, for you as the majority race to kind of lower your shoulders, I realize that I have to lower mine as well. Because if we are actually going to truly imagine difference differently, we are going to have to be courageous enough to have honest conversations. We're going to have to be courageous enough to not assign blame, but to say, I think of it as nonprofit mission. If our mission is to create this new order, this interconnectivity, then we're going to have to be fearless and courageous enough. Until we do, everything else is cosmetic. It's a waste of time. I'll give you one more intersectionality. I mentioned earlier that I'm the first African American executive director of Affirmations. Well, my relationship with the LGBT community, much like my faith, has always been at arm's length. Because from my own perception and the realities, it was run by gay white men. They led the movement. And when I tried to engage, it was friendly enough. Hello. But there's a difference between, and living my life, walking all of these lines, much like my faith, my grandma would always say her gut tells her something. And that's what I realized, is that my grandmother was right. It may have been 6 months, 6 weeks, or 6 years later, but when she said, don't go in that house, you should not go in that house. And much like my growing faith, I don't have to ask God why anymore. When my spirit tells me so, because I have removed all of you that was clouding my connection to God. I had those conversations directly. I know how to speak to the Father directly, but more than that, I've learned how to listen, and I've learned how to be obedient. So 7 months ago, I moved back here from Chicago. I left 6 years ago because as I continued to grow, I said, mission's not the place for me. I want to have full conversations with people of different races. I want to step comfortably in my skin. And because so much had been imprinted on me here from birth, I didn't have the courage to do it here. So I went elsewhere to do it. And I remember getting off the train in Chicago, the L, saying, you have the right, because God said so, to create any life for yourself you want. You are absolutely worthy. I did this at the Quincy station, and I saw the rush of people, and two things hit me. What a wonderful life, number one, and two, my goodness, there are a lot of people in Chicago. It's a big city, big city. But in that time, I had worked, I'm gay, I'm black, I am male, and I supported, of course, the LGBT community. It's part of who I am. But again, much like organized religion, from arm's length. 7 months ago, I made the choice to come here, because I said, this is the time to deal with that fear. You're working on the issues of faith and religion. You are working on your own issues of feeling good enough, feeling worthy enough. You and God are better than ever. But this is an important part of who you are as well. So maybe it's time to try to go and do the work there. It's a positive and an interesting story. I recently announced, after 7 fantastic months with the organization, I'll be resigning at the end of the year. And I'll say this. It has been the most rewarding experience, one of the most rewarding of my life. But when you are walking all of the intersections, I've got to pace which one I can deal with at what time. Because if you're going to really address it, you got to put your full back into it. So while I have been proud to have incredible conversations over the last 7 months, I remember on the radio show where it was a live call-in show on Black radio. And because of who I was, what I brought to the table, see the embracing of diversity, that organization can now go have conversations where we wouldn't have them before on Black radio. And I remember a pastor from a Black church called, and he basically said as nicely as he could, you sure you're praying to God? You sure it's God who's telling you you're okay? And it was loving and kind, and with everything in me, as those I call them my childhood feelings, but they were my feelings way through my 30s. I went, no, I know who I'm talking to. I know it's in my heart. But after 7 months, I'll have to get back to that one. I'll have to get back to my intersectionality with the LGBTQ community. So let's go back to faith. Here's the question I have. And I have it as much for myself, so I want to talk to other people of faith and ask you the question. If the Bible is unchanged, how do you personally reconcile the church's evolving views on homosexuality? Specifically, the Episcopal Church is now embracing same-sex marriage in the church. That's my question. It's wonderful, it's fantastic, but the 15-year-old in me needs to know that he can believe it and that the work was done to get there and it's just not a check off the box. So that's the question I'm asking. How do I reconcile that? How do we, as people of faith, with background, my background was deeply rooted in the Bible, the Word. And I've had to make what it felt like sacrifices, but now I'm being told, okay, you're welcome. I have questions. And I would imagine that many of you do as well. So that is my question for you, as it is for myself. I think I stayed close.
I think it's good.
I'm all set. Thank you so much. God bless.
Yeah. That was incredibly rich, and now is a time for some table conversation. We're going to do this for about 10 minutes, and I do get nervous about time, like all of you, so I will try to watch the clock as closely as possible, and you will see a side of me you don't want to see once we hit past that time. It's just not pretty for anybody. So here are the two questions to reiterate. Who and what groups have I excluded in my church, in my personal social work life? What can I do to be more inclusive of others in the future? Who can I invite? And that's Dr. Forsyth Brown's. And Darius Hillman's question is, if the Bible remains unchanged, how does the Episcopal Church reconcile its evolving views on homosexuality, specifically its willingness to perform same-sex marriage? So those are the two questions, and we'll give you 10 minutes. Thank you so much. Two-minute warning, 2 minutes. Okay, guys, we're going to start. All right, at this point, we'll ask Jay to come up. I'm sorry we're having some microphone issues. Is that better? That seems better. Love the mic. Great.
I'm incredibly nervous because I'm using a digital device to do this, and I very rarely do this, and I'm much more comfortable with actual paper. So if I just suddenly freak out up here, it's because something weird is, it's not the topic, oddly, it's the device. So, okay. Two questions inform my work around this. and that I offer for our reflection this morning. So, what race is your sex? And what sex is your race? I would propose that most people recoil at these questions because most of us have been taught to believe that those are different kinds of categories that have nothing to do with each other, or I should say, most white people have been taught that what kind of genitals we have has nothing to do with the color of our skin, and neither of those is really dealing with our affectional preferences. I want to suggest some reasons why those categories must always be thought together for the sake of a thriving Christian faith and an effective ministry in the world today, which is a huge topic and deserves book-length treatment. So hopefully all of us who are up here offering some provocative comments and observations and questions, and your own provocative comments and questions can move these topics along. I'll return to my own provocative questions in just a moment, but I want to give just a little bit of framing for it. First of all, where I teach at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, there's something there called the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies in Religion and Ministry, which was founded in 2000, and one of the very first programs that the center put into place was a racial ethnic roundtable project, given the center's commitment to recognizing that the questions white people ask about sexuality and gender are not the same questions that people of color ask, nor certainly the same answers are offered by those different groups. So we developed an African American roundtable, an Asian Pacific Islander roundtable, a Latino roundtable to address these questions. I have learned so much from from listening to the work of those groups, which I cannot underscore the importance enough of, and that is white people listening to experiences and communities from communities that are not white. Listening very deeply and very carefully. So here's just one example. Back in the early 2000s, when we were working hard on marriage equality in the days when we never imagined that would ever make it to the United States Supreme Court, we were putting programs together for helping congregations and faith communities understand why this was such an important issue. What I learned from listening to the African American Roundtable work on that question, I never would have supposed or imagined as a white person just thinking about this on my own. And I mean this: church, marriage, and family all intertwine for most black families as a strategy to defend against white supremacy in this country. That never would have occurred to me as a white person. So, the movement for marriage equality was, and for some still is, viewed as yet another attempt by white America to break up the black family. This enmeshing and intertwining of race and gendered sex is not new to the early 21st century. And again, this is really important, especially for white people to learn or to be reminded of on a regular basis. 2 points about that. First, the history of using both sexuality and gender to maintain white privilege and white supremacy. The emasculation of black men and the hypersexualizing of black women contributes to exactly that dynamic. Note well, by the way, that using emasculation or feminizing of men as a way to subjugate them says something terribly important and troubling about the sexism and misogyny of a culture in which being more like a woman is a bad thing. The depth of misogyny at the root of homophobia is so rarely talked about. And I believe that is precisely what is at stake for those who are so appalled by gay-male relationships. It's the erosion of a sphere for male privilege. Period. So a second point of history here, the history of anti-miscegenation laws, which Dr. Forsyth, thank you. I knew if I did not write it down, Dr. Forsyth Brown, so helpfully reminded us yesterday the history of anti-miscegenation laws, those laws that forbade what's so-called interracial marriage, which was still legal in this country until, that is, the laws on the books were still there against that until 1967. It's really important to remember or to know that those anti-miscegenation laws were enforced unequally depending on the gender of the partners. So, for example, it was considered worse for a black man to marry a white woman than for a white man to marry a black woman. Still is. Did I just hear somebody? Yes. So, why? Because by definition, marriage subordinates the wife to the husband. Did you all know that, married people? If a black man married a white woman, a white person would be automatically in a subordinate position to a black person. We can't have that in a white supremacist society. So, just those are two of many examples. The vast system, what I find helpful to call the categorical classification scheme of the modern West, is all about how race, sexuality, and gender, as well as class, all interact and mutually inform each other. And this scheme categorizes and treats every person as part of a group based on a category. But the categories aren't separate. As if we can talk about sex over here and gender over here and race over here and so on. They are deeply enmeshed, and moreover, these categorical classifications are never value neutral. It's not like, oh, it's just objective science, you know. No, these categorical classifications are constructed and deployed for the sake of benefiting some at the expense of others. And in Western society, and especially the modern West, this means heterosexual white males. By the way, if you're a heterosexual white male here this morning, none of us up here are trying to blame you for anything. This is hugely important in figuring out how to have safer conversations about these topics. The fact of the matter is, the system that I'm trying to evoke, that all of us are trying to evoke, no one here had anything to do with creating that system. No one. But some of us in this room benefit from the system. So it's not about blaming anybody, but it is about all of us taking responsibility for how we live in the system and being held accountable by others who are in it. Right? So no blame, but accountability. I'm sorry, I've had a lot of caffeine this morning, so that's why I'm just... Okay, and is that right? Oh my God, okay, right. This is not entirely new, this classification scheme to the modern West. There have been versions of it throughout Western history. What is new to the modern West is the way that it so often gets presented as a matter of scientific discourse. So what gets added in the 19th century is this notion that we're just talking objectively, scientifically about human bodies. And so you see articles in medical journals in the 19th century about the lung capacity of Africans, making them much more suitable for working outside on plantations, ironically. Oh, it just so happens we have some plantations down here. So, or that you see also in medical journals that the uterus predisposes women to domesticity and taking care of children. Oh, this was just at the same time, by the way, that they were advocating for a larger role in public. Or at the end of the 19th century, when German sexologists decided that men who were sexually attracted to other men must be more like women, so let's call them homosexuals, which was a medical term. So all of this is being medicalized, scientificized, I just made up that word, so that distancing our own prejudice and bias from these categories by trying to use science to justify them. So why does all of this matter? Oh, there's a couple of things I'm sorry I don't have time to talk about now, but these provocative questions, what race is your sex, what sex is your race, comes from a wonderful article. I may send a PDF of it to Michelle in case you would all like to take a look at it. It's really a mind-blowing, wonderfully eye-opening essay called What Race is Your Sex by Laurel Schneider, which really helps to show how race, sex, gender, and class all mutually inform each other. And here's where I'll wrap this up. The reason I find this so important for Christian faith and Christian ministry today is because what I tried to suggest last night in my sermon was that there is an important way to read how these systems shaped first century Palestine, to figure out how Jesus and his disciples engaged with it, and therefore how we can learn to do the same thing in our own day. Biblical theologian Walter Wink, whose work is very important in this regard, calls this system the domination system. The domination system, or the imperial system, or the nation-state system, he describes as this. It is characterized by unjust economic relations, oppressive political relations, biased race relations, patriarchal gender relations, hierarchical power relations, and the use of violence to maintain all of these. Wink does not say that sometimes it's about economics and sometimes it's about race and sometimes it's about gender. It's about all of them at the same time and all interconnected. So my question would be to discuss is three-part when you have some discussion time in a few moments. What race is your sex? And what sex is your race? And why, if this is true for you, do you find it impossible to answer that question? What's complicated about it, and how might that shape your approach to Christian faith and ministry in a complicated world? Thank you.
And now we have Heidi Kim, who is Missioner for Racial Reconciliation, Justice, and Advocacy Ministries of the Episcopal Church.
Hi. I know that title just sounds like so hilarious to me, because people will sort of say, so what do you do in your job? And I'll say, well, that's a really good question. It's a new job. And as Bishop Gibbs alluded to last night, he was part of the hiring committee and interviewed me for the position. So I'm also here at his invitation. So again, if you have problems with my presentation, talk to the gentleman in the purple. So, because I'm here for so many reasons because of Bishop Gibbs. So I want to start by telling you a story. All right. I'm the missioner for racial reconciliation, and it's really important to think about what you think about when you think about reconciliation, right? Our prayer book calls us to ministries of reconciliation, but what does that actually look like on the ground? So one of the things that I do is I go out and I do presentations, and in my own diocese, I have done a couple of clergy days at the invitation of my bishop. And I got to do a clergy day with the deacons. And as some of you know, I said yesterday, deacons are my people, right? Because, they're out in the world making trouble, making holy trouble. So I got to do a clergy day with deacons, and it was really fun because I got to drive a little bit south in my diocese and meet with a bunch of people that I knew and get to meet some new people. And in my diocese, the sort of median age of the clergy is about 65. So they're kind of older white folks in the Diocese of Olympia. I live in the Seattle area. And I got to meet all these wonderful people. I got to meet a new deacon, we'll call her Carol. She's wearing sunglasses and had a walking stick. She's visually impaired. And I go in and I give this awesome PowerPoint presentation, right, about all the stuff that I'm doing, right? And, as you know, the worst thing in the world is to have somebody read their PowerPoint slides word for word, because, as Edwin Tufte would say, that reduces the transmission of information to zero. because you're just reading your PowerPoint slide, right? And I do this thing, we have this great conversation, we're all sitting at lunch talking about racial justice and reconciliation. And after lunch, Carol comes over to me and says, for the second part of your presentation, would you mind reading your PowerPoint slides, because I'm legally blind and I will be able to follow much better. So I'm a person who literally, I get paid to think about diversity and inclusion every day, and I didn't see Carol. I saw her, but I didn't see her. And if it hadn't been for her being gracious and generous enough to come and tell me, I'm blind, could you please read these slides for me, I would have probably continued in my own intellectual arrogance about the right way to do a PowerPoint presentation to not see her. So, the lesson from this, well, and Carol, of course, made all these jokes about the blind leading the blind. The story that I want to tell here is that even when you do this every single day, you're going to make mistakes. And you have to rely on the grace and compassion of other folks to bring you along. And I talk about Carol all the time now because I need to be reminded that I have my own blind spots. I do this for a living. I was trained as a sociologist. I think about intersectionality all the time. And, there was a time when I was having to talk about this experience with the deacons, and the reading for that day was, the story of the rich young man, right? And my intellectual possession that I was unwilling to give up was how to give a PowerPoint presentation, right? My expertise. So there are always going to be these areas of our lives where we need to engage differently. And now, my charge is to say, what are all of the different blind spots that I have in my life about what I'm not seeing, what I'm not perceiving, and how is that excluding and diminishing the experience of others? And more importantly, what part of my soul is at stake for not seeing what I need to see? So, this brings me to the Episcopal Church. We're inclusive. Right? I have this in my PowerPoint presentation, I have this slide of an Episcopal shield, and it says, inclusive, welcoming, all these great things, this narrative that we have about who we are. We had all this legislation at General Convention this summer about racial reconciliation and justice, about evangelism, about the same-sex marriage, right? And as you know, even though you're at your convention here, we cannot legislate these problems away. But there is a certain extent to which our narrative about ourselves is like, hey, we're the inclusive church. We passed all these resolutions. We've got a big line item in the budget to talk about racism. We're so awesome. And people go home and think that they're done. Right? So that's the challenge. And, for me, I understand that my spiritual formation rests in the need to work for justice and reconciliation every single day and with every person that I encounter. We were having a little bit of a conversation at our dinner table last night about, folks that are resistant to talking about racism. Usually we're talking about older white folks that are resistant to talking about racism. And what I've found is that a lot of times people are resistant because there's been some harm, right? That someone came in and tried to tell a story of engaging in racial reconciliation, or they tried to reach out to someone and they were slapped down and shamed. And really, I think it's important for us as a church to understand the role that shame plays when we talk about this intersectionality. How many of you are familiar with the work of Brené Brown? Yeah, she's got a really great sort of, she's got a really great read on all of this kind of stuff about thinking about shame and vulnerability. We need to move away from that model, but it's very hard for us to reach out when we are triggered by those emotional points of something that's deeply personal, right? Something about my identity that you don't see, right? And that's the hard work of reconciliation. So in sort of feeding into some of these other conversations that talks that we've had, I always tell people when they say, what should I do? What should our congregation do to engage in racial reconciliation? How should we do it? I always think that the first question that you really need to do is to step back and say, well, why do we want to do it? What is it about our baptismal call? We are baptismal people, right? To seek and serve Christ and other persons. And I'm finding, and I've been listening to Bishop Curry preach a lot lately. He talks about the Jesus movement, becoming followers of Jesus. Well, it's that third to last question. Oh, good, I'm totally spacing on it now. All right, but to proclaim by word and example the good news, right? And that's the really tough one, right? Because it's easy to think about, well, of course I'm going to treat people with dignity and I'm going to treat them with justice. But to really proclaim by word and example, boy, that's a little bit tougher. So that's my why, right? And you all need to figure out what's your why, right? So that when you go out and invite people into your church, as Dr. Forsyth Brown was saying, that it's not about, we're so diverse, we're like such a cool church because we have like 7 Asian people and 6 Latinos. It's not about your pride in being an accepting and inclusive person. It's about what does it mean to be the body of Christ together, engaging in ministry together. All right, that's my why. And you need to really spend time as a diocese, as congregations, and as individual Christians and followers of Jesus about what your why is. So I think a lot of times, we get caught up in this identity of, we're the inclusive church. And the distinctions between identity and behavior are really important. So you've heard this, right? Well, I'm not a racist. But, and then something really terrible comes out after that, right? There's always like, and when South Carolina State House took down their Confederate flag, there was a demonstration after that by the Ku Klux Klan demonstrating protesting that they took down the Confederate flag. And the Ku Klux Klan said, we are not a hate group. We are proponents of white culture and white power. So if the Ku Klux Klan is not a hate group, if the Ku Klux Klan are not racist, then the identity of being called a racist has lost all meaning, right? So it's not about saying, I'm not a racist, I'm not a homophobe. It's what is your behavior? How are you being Christ's hands and feet in the world? So my question, which is no longer on the thing, so I can't read it. Okay, there we go. How does our identity as an inclusive and welcoming church actually impede our ability to embrace difference and work towards justice and reconciliation? How does our narrative about who we are keep us from seeing who's really with us in the room? Thank you.
So we have to end by 10:25, and so that means that you are going to have discussion, and we are going to step off the dais here, and there'll be opportunities for questions and answers with the panelists afterwards, maybe during lunch, things like that. I want to take a moment and thank Michelle Meach for all the work she did for this. As well as to draw attention to a diocesan program called the Race Relations and Diversity Task Force that Michelle is heading up. And the reason why I think that task force needs to be brought up is that everybody here has raised up the need for some safe conversations and space for deliberation together. And I think that what is coming out of that committee is incredibly important and wonderful. So, Michelle, thank you for all your work. And I have this basket of Jolly Ranchers for you. That's right. So we're going to do 10 minutes of conversation till 10:25. You're going to have a break until, look at, I'm such a Martin, when are we going to break? The bishop, yes. I can't, my eyes are horrible. I'm sorry, sir. I can't even see what you're trying to say. Okay, great. So 10 minutes of discussion, and please thank these wonderful panelists for us. And the questions again are: what is your race? What race is your sex? What sex is your race? Why can't you figure out how to answer the above questions easily or straightforwardly? And that's Jay. And Heidi's is how might our identity as an inclusive and welcoming church accurately, you know what, I really can't read it off the screen, but you get the gist of what she's trying to say. And what we'd like to do is have you all interact with each other, not just with your own churches, but maybe turn around and talk to other churches about how this might happen. Thank you. I'm sorry.
I do not want to cut off your conversations. You seem to be extremely engaged, and I encourage you to continue these conversations as we go forward. However, and you can actually do this during the break if you'd like, but right now we will stand in recess until 10:45. 10:45. Please be back in your seats at 10:45. If you'd like to stay where you are and continue your conversation, that's fine. We are in recess until 10:45. It is 10:45. Please come back to your seats. Because of the next two pieces of business, rather than having folks getting up and down, I have given the Deus party permission not to be here for a while. Please come and sit down. Bring them in from the highways and the byways and the coffee machine. The chair needs to make a point of privilege at the moment. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, the very point of this diocesan convention, its title and the program, is about diversity. The fact that diversity is in the title assumes that we do not all agree on everything. The fact that we are Episcopalians, Anglicans, means we don't agree on everything, but we spend our lives looking for right relationship where everyone stays in the tent. I have debated for the last 15 minutes whether or not to make this statement, and I am going to make it because I am so angry. one of our delegations has walked out of convention. And given the amount of time that I have put into the relationship for the last 15 and a half years with St. John's Detroit, I am extremely disappointed. I spent part of the break giving the rector a piece of my mind. I hope it wasn't too big a piece, because I still need it. But my friends, I don't do anything expecting you all to agree with me. Just wait a few moments when you hear my address. But we do have to have these conversations. And this is about as safe a place to have the conversation as possible, because we are all Episcopalians, we are all Anglicans, and we know what it means to disagree. I will tell you that I've already told the rector that the vestry of St. John's will be getting a letter from me expressing my extreme displeasure. What happens after that will depend a great deal on how much St. John's wishes to remain in relationship with me and this diocese. It's about relationship, folks. And the Bible says nothing about liking one another. It does say we must love one another. I believe that this diocese, together, all of us, you are the diocese, not the office at 4800 Woodward. This diocese, you and I, have worked together too hard and too long for delegations to walk out. We have disagreed on things before. Heck, for the first 10 years I was here, the debate about the budget seemed to take up most of our time. And now, we have such clarity and such full embrace and ownership of our life and mission together that we hardly have a peep during the budget. And that's wonderful. That's not about giving in or giving up. It's about recognizing that we live in relationship with one another. And I must tell you, to know that we have 100% participation in our budget brings tears to my eyes. 15 and a half years we've worked on that together. So you might imagine, yes, thank you. Thank you. So you might imagine why I might be a little bit upset. Friends, if you disagree with me, write me a letter. Send me an email. God knows I get enough of those. I also get notes about things you agree with and things you like. That's part of our life together. Gosh, if disagreement was a reason to leave, I would have left being your bishop about 15 minutes after I became your bishop. Let's continue to have the conversation about diversity. As I will say in As I will say in so many words in a few moments, I think diversity is a whole lot more welcoming than not. Amen. Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Reverend Reed Hamilton, chaplain of Canterbury House, University of Michigan, and the Reverend Sarah Midzolkowski, chaplain of One Community MSU, for a report on our college chaplaincies. And I apologize to the two of you for taking up some of your time.
Far from it, Bishop. I would like to thank you and Michelle and the diocesan staff for one of the most stimulating presentations I have ever experienced at any diocesan convention in any diocese. Okay, all right. Well, also, I'm going to claim the privilege of the losing football team. That was hard, folks. That was tough. Got to tell you.
Would you like an extra 10 seconds at the end?
That would only be for me.
As a matter of fact,
that would only be for me to grant, and you know this Buckeye isn't doing that.
Yeah. We'll get to you later. Okay. Well, yes, absolutely. Well, as many of you know, I'm freshly back from longish sabbatical. I took the winter semester, 2015, January through May, and I was in Stuttgart, Germany. I'm delighted to be back. In many ways, this convention has been, in the last couple of days, a big piece of my experience of coming home, because I get to see so many friends and colleagues. And so, ich habe ein bisschen Deutsch gelernt. I've learned a little bit of German. Glücklich zu sehen. I'm very glad to see you. So, Maggie, did I get that right? Sorta. She says, sorta. Okay. I was looking informally at how European campus ministries and young adult ministries are responding to an environment of deep secularism. They are much more secular in Europe than we are here, and we're headed that direction, according to the Pew Research Foundation. Now, well over a third of our young adults ages 18 through 29 report that they have no religious affiliation. The term we have adopted for them in campus ministry and in the church and in sociology, I believe, is nuns, N-O-N-E-S, nuns. I'm working with a lot of nuns at the University of Michigan. It's a challenging environment, and I have learned from my brothers and sisters working in Europe that it requires some very creative responses. It requires for us to be out there and not so much in here. The sabbatical was a good opportunity for me to step back from Canterbury House, from the Diocese of Michigan, from the Episcopal Church, and look around. And it is a surprise to me to see the extent to which we have a tendency to navel gaze, my brothers and sisters. We really need to be focusing on how we are going to minister to people who are not now, might never become, may never identify themselves as Christians, and be okay with that. So Canterbury House often has not more than half of its students who are Episcopalians when they first walk in the door. We have many students who come to us from other traditions. We have always at least 10 or 15% of our students who are nuns and come to us because they like jazz music. We've still got to get out into the world, and I want to acknowledge the work of campus ministry throughout this diocese, not just at the University of Michigan, not just at Michigan State University, but also at Eastern Michigan University, the informal things that happen at Wayne State, and the search for Episcopal students at Hillsdale College. That's quite a search. That is quite a search. Yes. And I also want to just lift up for you some just really happy news of some of our students. Here with us this morning, J.P. Seguin, who's been recently admitted to postulancy in the Diocese of Michigan. J.P. Margaret Wessel Walker, who was such a fabulous student at Brent House at the University of Chicago, that when she came back to Ann Arbor, I immediately snatched her up for Canterbury House, served as an alternate deputy to General Convention this year. Margaret. Margot, what are you doing sitting down there? Please, would you please stand? Margot Straykosh will be graduating from the University of Michigan Law School in December, and she's going to be serving as a clerk for the Alaska Supreme Court. Yeah. Canterbury alumna Victoria Bell, who grew up at Christ Church Dearborn, has been selected as a delegate for the United Nations Conference on the Status of Women in March. Yeah. And I'm very much looking forward, as I hope you all are, to the ordination of Arita Bridgmahan, December 11th of this year. December 12th of this year. Yay, thank you. All right, I won't take my 10 seconds from you, Sarah. You know, it's liable to be a big disaster, so you just go right ahead.
Thank you, and before Sarah begins, I must announce the polls are closed.
All right. I want to introduce to you one of my students who is here with me today, who grew up actually not in this diocese, but in the Lansing area, because he's from St. David's, Lansing, which just happens to be on the other side in that other diocese that is part of our area. And I wanted to let you know that Nick comes to us having been a lifelong Episcopalian, and along with me is learning a whole heck of a lot about Lutheranism as well in our continued partnership. So let me introduce Nick Reynolds.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Sarah. Yes, as she said, my name is Nicholas Reynolds, and I was told to talk about I was told to talk, but I'm glad to talk about it. I was told to talk about how student ministry has impacted me. And to start, I'll say that MSU is a campus of 50,000 students. So it is a big place and a great place, but sometimes you feel like you're swallowed up in this place. And so when I found campus ministry, I felt like I was part of a community, a welcoming community, that made me be able to feel the way I want to feel and be able to act the way I want to act. And it's just a welcoming place with a lot of good people. And I'll say that without it, I would not be where I am. And I am thrilled to be before you all. And I'll also say that it's great, and I'm rambling, it seems. But I'll say that it has also allowed me to, it allows me to serve my community, to serve my campus, and to serve Christ. And that is one of the things I like about it also, is the goal of our group is to do exactly that, and we all have a common bond. And that is probably the thing that I appreciate most about campus ministry. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Nick, I think, brings up one of the things that I'm proudest about campus ministry, and that is that everybody truly is welcome. And over the years, we've had among our membership folks who have come from various backgrounds, big cities, inner cities, country, the wilds of the UP. We have folks that are wildly diverse in their political beliefs, in their musical tastes, in their academic ability. We've had folks with mental health issues, folks with physical challenges, folks of all races and nationalities and backgrounds. And it is my proudest moment when I see everyone being welcomed, and everyone welcomed as Christ. And given the same opportunity to serve one another. One of the things that can be very hard to translate to folks is the individual stories of how our ministry can affect people. I just wanted to give you two little vignettes. One from a grad student last year, a Chinese grad student who decided he wanted to be baptized, but knew that he had to do so in secret because he does hope to go back to China. He's an engineer. And if people in the party knew that he was baptized Christian, he would lose his job, his family would lose his status. And so he worked with the senior pastor and I quietly to be catechized, to be introduced to the gospel, and was baptized off records, so that he, because one of the things we know is with the population that come in from various countries, including communist countries, also come monitors. And so you have to be very careful what you do and what you say. Even in the campus community where we talk about freedom, when we proclaim freedom, there are folks who aren't as necessarily free as we would think. And so his experience was huge, was a huge testimony to those of us who know him, and we are a part of a big international community and help out with international campus ministry to our students and our faculty who come. The last thing was a young man I met through the LGBT Resource Center at Michigan State, who was a student from Brazil, who came and met and was in relationship with another young man here. And this young man is his family is very wealthy and well connected to the political system in Brazil. And when his family came up and found out that he was in a relationship with a young man, they first beat him within an inch of his life in his dorm, and then hired lawyers to come and formally disassociate him so that he would have no inheritance rights, and cut ties completely with him. They also were trying for a while to kidnap him and take him back to Brazil, where there is a very well-funded and supported paramilitary retraining camp that young people are taken to. And so he contacted through the International Student Group, the LGBT Resource Center, and then also came to the religious advisor's attention. And he was hidden. We had to hide him on the MSU campus and in the community from his own parents. Thanks be to God, this was successful. He and his partner were hidden. The lawyers who were paid for eventually went back to Brazil. He was formally dissociated from his family, and we were able to find funding through the religious and the LGBT communities to be able to keep him in school so that he could actually get his degree. And folks are also working with him legally on immigration issues and status. So, none of that is anything you can write on a parochial report. So that's just that I say these vignettes. I want to tell these stories because this is the type of work that you get involved with that you have no preparation for in seminary or anything like that, but you wind up being there in the right place at the right time. And because of what you all do in the giving that happens from this diocese, in the communication that happens to us of students who are coming our way, we are able to do the job of shepherding lifelong Episcopalians and picking up the pieces for those who have never been. That's what we do. We don't know from day to day what we're going to expect or what the population is going to need of us. You all make it possible that Reed and I and our constituent students can serve others. So this is probably one of the most purely missional endeavors that this diocese will ever do. And we thank you for the money, for the support, for the prayers, and we hope that you will come and see us and check out for yourself what we are able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move to the special order of business for the bishop's address. My sisters and brothers in the risen Christ, please indulge me for just a moment, and as you would in a service of holy baptism, answer the following questions. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself?
I will, with God's help.
Will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being?
I will, with God's help.
Thank you. I stand before you today as a sinner among sinners, in need of the flowing waters of reconciliation and saved only by the grace of our loving God. I stand before you today to declare what we all know: this world in which we live is broken and hurting and in desperate need of those same flowing waters and God's saving grace. And I stand before you today and submit that this world most certainly needs us to authentically love our neighbor and respect their human dignity. It is all too easy to dismiss what I have just said through words such as, "Tell us something we don't already know." And that makes me wonder if we are willing to own our part, our sinfulness, in continuing to perpetuate the brokenness, the hurt, and the despair. We declare in our Sunday worship that we believe in a God who creates, redeems, and sanctifies. We profess in our baptismal liturgy that we will seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves. As a church, we have used our beliefs to ridicule others, even within our own communion, who can't quite seem to appreciate our way in matters of sexuality, marriage, and openness to participation in the full life of the church, including ordination. But when it suits our purposes, we are quick to repeat the words that suggest a commitment to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. In my address to convention in 2006, I said to you, quote, "Respecting human dignity is a sacred responsibility that finds expression within and outside of the faith community. As a baptized member of the body of Christ, I believe we who find ourselves within the church must be held to an even greater standard, rooted and grounded in God's grace. It is precisely because we are a community of faith that all we do and say must reflect a commitment to upholding the worth of every member of the human family. This is as true in those times when such worth is hard to acknowledge or afford as it is in those times when such worth is freely and easily recognized. To do otherwise is quite simply and unequivocally sin. Close quote. Lately, I have begun to wonder just how far and how authentically we allow our righteous identity to journey with us. What is our reaction when we hear a joke that derides another race, ethnicity, gender, or someone's sexual orientation? What is our response when we become aware that a female coworker is being paid less to do the same job as a male coworker? If you are Caucasian, how do you react when someone confronts you about your privilege? If you are a person of color, what is your first response that comes to mind when you hear someone say, "I'm not a racist, some of my best friends are black"? Or, "Some of my best friends are Spanish"? Or, "Some of my best friends are," you fill in the blank. If you are part of the LGBTQ community, what are the first words that come to mind when, after you have uttered the word lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer in a general conversation, and the person changes the subject or suddenly has to rush off to another meeting or insists, "Well, I'm not homophobic, my nephew is gay"? What is our response to the continuing tragedies brought on by gun violence, war, or acts of terrorism? When faced with racism, discrimination, or senseless violence, do any of us immediately think of the waters of reconciliation? Do any of us really go first to the place of God's grace? I can honestly admit and say to you that I don't. But I know that's what I aspire to because of God's unconditional love for me. I'm a sinner. I seek reconciliation. You see, the justice, the love of neighbor, the respect for human dignity we proclaim is not just for those with whom we agree. It is particularly for those with whom we disagree or find no common ground upon which to stand. This is not custom or culture that is simple to find or live. Unfortunately, it is a lack of justice, a growing disdain for our neighbors, and an increasing resentment of people who are different from us that breeds fear of the other in our communities and plunges us into the darkness of sin in need of God's redeeming light. Perhaps sharing some of my own personal story will help make clear not only the reality of racism and many of the other isms that need redeeming, but also our corporate need for reconciliation and redemption. As a black man who was born in the mid-1950s and who grew up in our nation's capital in the early 1960s, I have vivid memories of times when fear was part of being a black person in America. Some might think that the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling was a sign that equality, at least in education, was a new given. But as a little boy, I watched television in horror as I saw black people, including boys and girls, subject to hateful verbal abuse, rocks hurtling through the air, vicious dogs, police batons, and water cannons. And today, blacks and other minorities still have to fight to receive an education that begs the question, is equal an appropriate word to describe what is available? Some might suggest that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 gave blacks equal access to the voting booth and thus the ability to have a say in who governs and how they govern. But again, dogs, rocks, and less than sympathetic police greeted some black voters in parts of this country. Extra requirements about reading, writing, and the ability to recite parts of the U.S. Constitution from memory were enacted in some jurisdictions to frustrate black voters and thus hold back the momentum toward equality. Today, many would submit that this is ancient history, and here's one of those times when I don't think of the waters of reconciliation first, after all, we elected a black president. What more could you want? Well, how about a Voting Rights Act that doesn't leave gaping holes designed to prevent blacks and other minorities from equal access to the polling place? And how about a culture where the best person for the job is hired, elected, or appointed, rather than a one-and-done culture that succeeds only in checking off boxes on a diversity checklist? The assassinations of John F. Kennedy, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Bobby Kennedy were, for me, parts 1, 2, and 3 of a horror story that seemed to suggest that the content of one's character would always be undermined by the color of one's skin. This is a horror story that continues to play out in my life today, especially when I'm followed around a store under the guise of providing customer service, while really the point is to make sure the black man doesn't steal anything. This is a horror story that still plays out when I hear suggestion that electing a black man to lead the Episcopal Church is just another accommodation of a special interest group. God's grace are not the first two words that come to mind as this horror story continues to unfold. When I chose to attend a predominantly white Roman Catholic all-boys school instead of following my childhood friends to the public high school in the hood, many of those friends turned their backs on me and declared that I was an Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside. When I went to college, the black friends I had dispersed when I stopped pledging the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, the first international fraternity organization to be founded on the campus of an historically black college. And when I felt called after seminary to serve a congregation that was not on the south side of Chicago, and when I suggested to folks at the Episcopal Church Center that we should broaden our efforts from just a focus on anti-racism to incorporate a focus on diversity, and when I don't give special attention or special privileges to other people of color just because we share an ethnicity, I'm accused of not liking black people. And unfortunately, rather than respect human dignity, no one seems to care enough to ask for an explanation. They simply jump to their own conclusions. I must confess to you that I do not consider myself a radical person. Yes, I supported an afro in my youth. I proclaimed that I was black and proud and considered people such as Angela Davis as heroes. And I know there's some of you who are too young to know who Angela Davis was. However, there have been times beginning with my childhood and continuing through my ministry as a bishop that some friends, colleagues, acquaintances, even church people have declared me to be not black enough. And those would be colleagues of the Caucasian as well as the African American persuasion. Still others, I guess for ease of categorization, will lump me with, or should I say stereotype me as, all other African Americans. I submit that these responses to me are based in fear. The fear of difference, fear of the other, and fear of what true diversity might mean or look like. I also admit and recognize that my story, my experience, is not unique. There are stories similar to mine and stories far worse than mine among African Americans, the LGBTQ community, the Hispanic community, the Muslim community, women and children trapped in human trafficking, and in communities still grieving the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, and many others, too numerous to name here. The questions are before us. How will we respond to that fear? Are we willing to own our part, our sinfulness, in perpetuating an environment of fear? Are we willing to seek reconciliation for our sinful denial of another's dignity? I wonder. Since the school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012, there have been 87 shootings in a school or on school property. In those shootings, 66 people were killed and another 122 were wounded. Some of those wounds seriously altering the quality of life of the injured. In the year 2015 alone, just through October 17th, there have been 305 mass shootings in the United States, including those perpetrated in schools. Don't believe me? Look it up. I did. Road rage is also getting out of hand. On October 18th, a driver in Texas ran a motorcycle off the road, seriously injuring the couple riding it, and when confronted about it, he's caught on tape yelling, "I don't care." And in the latest reported incident, 4-year-old Lily Garcia of Albuquerque, New Mexico, was killed when road rage turned into gunfire. What is your reaction as an individual? What is our reaction as a Christian community? How do we journey into and through this environment of sin, despair, and fear? Where is our promise to love neighbor, seek justice, and respect our neighbor's dignity? How do we share our response in a wounded world? At this 181st Convention of the Diocese of Michigan, we have purposefully chosen to engage the conversation about race relations and diversity, precisely because we are called to be and profess to be a people of reconciliation, people of justice, and people who respect the dignity of every human being. I am hopeful about the beginnings of this conversation because as Christian community, always in need of the cleansing waters of reconciliation and of God's redeeming grace, we cannot fulfill our duty of making disciples, preaching the gospel, or speaking truth to power if we cannot, in spirit and in truth, love one another as Jesus loves us. Dear friends, in some respects, we have come a long way. But there is still much we have to do. In 1994, the House of Bishops of our church issued a pastoral letter on the sin of racism. In the opening lines of that letter, the bishops declared, and I quote, "For decades, this church has issued statements, passed resolutions, and taken actions which have addressed many aspects of racism and racial justice. While positive changes have occurred in certain times in various situations, racism not only persists in our world, but in many places is powerfully resurgent. Later in that same letter, the bishops state, escalating violence in America illustrates the complexity of racism. At the heart of the matter is fear. We fear those who are different from ourselves, and that fear translates into violence, which in turn creates more fear. The essence of racism is prejudice coupled with power. It is rooted in the sense of pride and exclusivity, which assumes that I and my kind are superior to others and therefore deserve special privileges. And then still further on, they say, racism may be manifest in any race when it is in a position of power and dominance. In the United States, our primary experience is one of white privilege, even in places where whites may be in a minority in the surrounding population. This comes as a surprise to many white people because they do not think of themselves as racist. They may even see themselves as victims of various violent reactions against the dominant culture. Yet there are many in our society at all levels who seem to find a certain security in racially restricted communities, schools, clubs, fraternities, sororities, churches, and other institutions. Questions abound. Can the old melting pot of image of assimilation be replaced by a better metaphor that reflects the value of difference? How can the inherited privilege and unearned advantage of some people be used to bring about the reconciliation of all? How can the church offer all people the supreme advantage of knowing Christ when too often it is itself a bastion of separation? How can the Episcopal Church, which reflects the dominant culture, be a factor in changing destructive racial attitudes and behaviors? Are we ready to find new common ground on which all may stand together? Will we trust the grace of God to enable us to bridge our many unhappy divisions? End quote. I firmly believe that the statements and observations made in the questions posed in this 20-year-old document, unfortunately, are as valid today as they were when they were written. And at the risk of incurring major pushback from some of my sisters and brothers, I suggest that what has been said in the 1994 pastoral must necessarily be broadened to cover matters of homophobia, sexism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and other isms and phobias that seek to oppress, improperly judge, or deprive another of their human rights and or dignity. In 2006, the House of Bishops reiterated their commitment to root out the sin of racism and invited all members of the church to join in this mission of justice, reconciliation, and unity. Again, this is still the invitation today and still demands us to broaden our vision to include the recipient of another's response to fear simply because they are who God has created them to be. Although I was not a member of the House of Bishops in 1994, I remember receiving that letter with great hope as a parish priest. I was in the House of Bishops in 2006 and participated in bringing forward the renewed commitment for action against this sin against humanity. I am humbled to inform you today that I have been appointed by Presiding Bishop Catherine to serve on a newly formed House of Bishops task force, which will begin work in December of this year on a new pastoral teaching on racism. I bid your prayers for this work and for our corporate struggle to unbind us from this insidious evil. It is my hope and expectation that just as the 1994 pastoral was a faithful product reflecting the realities of the time in which it was written, so too the next pastoral must reflect who and where we are today. To that end, I believe we cannot discuss or address racism in a void. The horrible, tragic shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, the church burnings which followed that tragedy, and the burnings now occurring in the St. Louis area near Ferguson, make it clear that the church is not exempt from the insidious violence of today's America, while it also makes clear that our approach to mental health, the accessibility to guns, and our collective understanding of freedom are all in great need of review and action. It saddens me that the United States, the country that embraces and celebrates the freest society on earth, has more guns per capita than anywhere else in the world, but seems to have less will to make sure they are handled responsibly by appropriate people. I am not advocating, I'm not an advocate of diminishing the freedoms of the Second Amendment. However, I am an advocate of honoring the rights, freedoms, and dignity of all people so that guns and gun violence do not destroy the freedoms of others. I particularly do not support and will not condone the concealed carry of guns in churches of this diocese. Period. The only exception that I will agree to is for carry by licensed law enforcement officers. I do not accept the notion that arming parishioners is the way to stop the violence. Already, we have seen reports of private citizens taking aim with their legally carried weapons at shoplifters, a level of deterrence even police should not use on unarmed suspects. If lawmakers are serious about protecting all people, let's find a way to especially protect the most vulnerable among us without turning schools and churches into potential shooting galleries. Now, I am not so naive as to believe that all of you will like all of what I have said thus far. In fact, I fully expect the usual handful of letters and negative evaluations that prefer to attack my personhood rather than listen to the message. I have learned over the years that too many folks believe that the bishop's job at convention is to cheer on the troops and highlight all our good qualities so that others will come to know how wonderful and good we are. However, I have also accepted that as bishop I am called less to comfort the afflicted and more to afflict the comfortable. That is not to suggest that there isn't some good and holy ministry being done by us and among us. But I would fall short of my duty if I didn't stir the waters from time to time so that we continue to be aware of the circumstances and needs of the communities we serve. Further, it is absolutely important that as we reach out and create new networks for mission, we do so with the correct frame of mind, aware of the baggage we bring to every situation by virtue of our own privilege, power, prejudices, and proclivities. Only from a place of true acceptance of our sinfulness and our continuing need for the waters of reconciliation can we be among our sisters and brothers in want as authentic bearers of Christ. This same invitation to authenticity was very much evident to me as the Episcopal Church met in the 78th General Convention in Salt Lake City this past summer. From deputies and bishops marching to show support for an end to gun violence, to the election of Michael Bruce Curry as the 27th presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, to the acceptance of a church-wide budget that adds $2 million grant pool for racial justice and reconciliation, a $1 million increase in funding for mission enterprise zones, and transfers $2.8 million from unrestricted reserves to evangelism initiatives, all while reducing the asking percentage from each diocese to 15% from the current 19% by 2017. This afternoon, you will hear from our deputation about some of the other high points of the recent General Convention, so I do not want to steal their thunder. However, I do need to speak to two items that were part of our deliberations as church this summer, items that address our need to respect the other. First, in the aftermath of the tragic DUI death in Maryland last year, each diocese, congregation, seminary, and affiliated agency has been asked to update their policies on the use of alcohol and other substances with the potential for misuse. I am pleased to say that the Diocese of Michigan already has a policy in place that was approved by the Diocesan Council and was based on the materials that were submitted to General Convention and ultimately included in the resolution that was adopted. The basics of the Episcopal Church policy and the one adopted by your Diocesan Council include providing a safe and welcoming environment for all people, including those in recovery, monitored use of alcohol at church gatherings, availability of appealing non-alcoholic alternatives with equal prominence and accessibility, and the serving of food is a must when alcohol is present. This list does not include all the provisions of our diocesan policy, so I ask the leadership of each congregation to seek out the policy on our website, and I strongly urge each congregation to adopt its own policy as a sign of full participation in the wider church's aspiration to be a place in which conversations about alcohol, substance abuse, or addiction are not simply about treatment, but about renewal, justice, wholeness, and healing. Let us put away our fears and let God's grace lead us. Second, in a letter to the clergy and lay leadership of congregations, I reported on the decision made by the General Convention regarding marriage in the Episcopal Church. In part, in that letter, I stated, quote, "There wasn't just history occurring through the actions of our church, but also history being made in the Supreme Court decision, allowing for marriage for all loving couples, regardless of gender, followed closely by the church's decision to revise our marriage rights to include lesbian and gay couples. As with the decision in 2012 to permit the blessing of same-gender relationships, it is clear to me that we are not of one mind in the diocese about these decisions. However, after conversation with the Standing Committee of the Diocese, with several senior clergy and others, I am prepared to give a framework for how we will proceed. Beginning on the first Sunday of Advent 2015, November 29, I will permit the solemnization of gay and lesbian marriages in this diocese. I want to publicly share this policy with you in this forum. Again, this policy takes effect on Sunday, November 29th, 2015. All requirements stated in Canon 118 of the Celebration and Blessing of Marriage, formerly entitled of the Solemnization of Holy Matrimony, as amended by Resolution A036-2015, will apply. That is, no change to present rules, except that the language of the canon has been rendered gender neutral. For a priest to make use of these liturgies, the priest must be in conversation with their vestry or bishop's committee and obtain their support, not their vote, their support for their use in the congregation. No deviations from the authorized texts will be permitted during the period of trial use. Let me say that again. No deviations from the authorized texts will be permitted during the period of trial use. Only the authorized rites are permitted. Use of the rite currently contained in the prayer book with homemade modifications is strictly prohibited. At least one of the parties must be baptized. As has always been the case, no priest shall be required to perform any marriage. That's not new. Where there has been a previous marriage or civil union, all the current provisions of Canon 119 pertaining to remarriage after divorce will apply, as will our own diocesan procedures. In the case of a gay or lesbian couple already married in a civil ceremony, provision is made for the marriage to be blessed. A gay or lesbian couple whose union has been previously blessed, but who now desire legal marriage in the church, may proceed to be married in the church. Between now and November 29th, 2015, the guidelines for use of the authorized liturgy for blessing of same-sex relationships, promulgated in 2012, remains in effect. And finally, I will not tolerate any dishonoring of opposing viewpoints from either side of the matter. No one and no congregation will be forced to use the trial liturgies. No one and no congregation will be forced to perform any marriage, a current provision of our canons. If any harassment is experienced, I ask that you bring it to my attention immediately. This policy expects from each member of this diocesan community a commitment to live faithfully our promise to love and respect our neighbor. Only by witnessing to this way of being, as difficult as it may be, can we be authentically people of justice and reconciliation. Let us put away our fears and let God's grace lead us. As I travel around the diocese, I see and celebrate the many ways we are already working to be authentic in our faith. Great strides are being made in service to and respect for those less fortunate than ourselves. Throughout our diocese, congregations are involved in community gardens, food banks, and feeding programs, which are battling hunger, food deserts, and poor nutrition. Congregations have developed partnerships to fight homelessness through fundraising and hosting shelters, and partnerships with local business associations to empower financial independence. Many congregations are involved with hosting or hosting pantries of various kinds that work to provide personal necessities beyond food. Work in advocacy and action to help folks whose heat or water has been turned off, and make available space for other not-for-profit community groups who provide services the church cannot. All of this is happening. We also seek to be authentic as a corporate body through our continuing support of ministries such as Mariners Inn, a long-time agency of the Diocese of Michigan that serves as an anchor for those struggling to navigate the treacherous waters of homelessness and substance abuse, and seeks to heal families and the community, one father at a time. Santa Teresa y San Juan, a relatively new ministry of the Diocese of Michigan that helps support the spiritual needs of the Latino community. If you attended the opening session of convention yesterday afternoon, you heard an update of that ministry from Missioners Juan Perez and Marcia Ledford. If you want to learn more and to be involved, please contact one of them for direction. Our companion diocese relationship. In conjunction with our ministry in Southwest Detroit, we continue to partner with the Diocese of the Dominican Republic, along with the dioceses of Eastern Michigan and Western Michigan. Just this past July, the church we have been building together was consecrated. New projects are anticipated and being discussed with Bishop Holguin. In February, we expect the consecration of the Bishop Coadjutor, Moises Quesada Mota, who was elected at a special convention in July. I know Bishop-elect Mota from serving together on the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, and I look forward to continuing a strong mutual partnership. Financial investments. The Diocese of Michigan remains the largest single investor in the Opportunity Resource Fund, with nearly $1.5 million invested in a statewide community development fund that used to be known as the Michigan-McGee Interfaith Loan Fund. This fund provides loans through careful and flexible resource allocation to benefit Michigan communities. The core values of the fund include treating everyone fairly, respecting, supporting, and valuing all people, ideas, and backgrounds. Response to the Syrian refugee crisis. Thanks to the efforts of the Reverend Terry Pilarski, we are connecting with our full communion partners in the Lutheran Church and others to participate in refugee resettlement here in Southeast Michigan. Part of the offering from our Eucharist will go to this effort, and I encourage you to use the information Terry gave us this morning to begin more local efforts to assist. All of this ministry, corporate, local, church-wide, can only be accomplished from a place where diversity is embraced, not feared, from a place where we accept our sinfulness and seek repentance and reconciliation, from a place where character content overrides skin color. It all starts inside the heart of each of us. Stepping forth from this convention, I am calling upon the entire diocese to dedicate the coming year to using every possible opportunity for conversation about issues of race and diversity. Clergy and lay leaders, it is your responsibility to engage the conversation in your congregations. Vestries, bishops' committees, and campus ministry boards need to acknowledge the fear of difference as it is manifested in their context and make resources available for the members of our congregations to talk through and move through those fears toward reconciliation and to an authentic embrace of diversity. The clergy community will engage issues of race and diversity at the Clergy Day gathering in November and at Clergy Conference in the spring. The vestry days in February will include a component that will empower a conversation among our congregational leaders. The ministry fair in May will be another opportunity for a broader conversation. And the ministry retreat in January, which is required of all those in our ordination process, will include conversation about race and diversity. The issues of power, privilege, and prejudice are not one and done conversations. Like the discernment of God's call to serve, this journey is lifelong if we intend to be honest in the embrace of our baptismal vow to respect the dignity of every human being. As a diocesan household, we must not allow ourselves to be gripped by fear. Every opportunity we take to reach out and partner with our communities is an opportunity for Christ to be made known. The Christ that I know did not shun diversity. Rather, he embraced it. In John 4, Jesus accepted water from the woman at the well, even though she was a Samaritan. In Matthew 8, he didn't walk away from the leper, he touched and healed him. In Mark 2, Jesus eats with tax collectors and other sinners. And as if that wasn't enough, in Luke 19, Jesus stays at the home of Zacchaeus, a chief tax collector who was rich. I have to tell you, I believe diversity is a heck of a lot more attractive and welcoming than uniformity. So let's put away our fears and let God's grace lead us. Now, before I finish my remarks today, I need to circle back to one of the historic events from this past summer. On Saturday, June 27, in a special session of the House of Bishops, a very dynamic, faithful, thoughtful evangelist for Jesus and the gospel was elected the 27th presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. Michael Bruce Curry, who likes to refer to the ministry to which he is called as PB as being the CEO, Chief Evangelism Officer, was elected on the first ballot by more than a two-thirds vote of the House of Bishops, and later concurred by the House of Deputies in an overwhelming vote of 800 to 12. In the coming 9 years of his tenure as presiding bishop, the Church has an unprecedented opportunity to make known in bold, new ways the best-kept secret we call the Episcopal Church. If Bishop Curry is the chief evangelism officer, then we must also be evangelism officers. That means we share together the duty to make Christ known everywhere and every chance we get. Just as Bishop Catherine was the right presiding bishop for the time, I believe Bishop Curry will be the right person for this coming time, and I give jubilant thanks. However, we must be alert and vigilant as people charged with being authentic. A young priest I know by the name of Father Jabril Ballantyne has stated, and I quote, "As we have seen from the election of President Obama, we have a tendency to allow ourselves to be carried away with the euphoria of these monumental occasions. And while caught up in the rapture, we often miss opportunities for something beautiful and everlasting." End quote. This new era of evangelism must embrace diversity, or the Church will be lost. This euphoria and excitement over this new day of leadership must carry into actions and a changing of hearts from fear of the different to full appreciation of and respect for the other. I ask your prayers for our new presiding bishop and for our church. We need them. And now in closing, I want to borrow again from the 1994 Bishop's Pastoral on the Sin of Racism. In concluding the pastoral, the bishops issue an invitation to the whole church with these words, and I quote, "The Catechism declares that the mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. Through baptism, all Christians are called and empowered to participate in a ministry of reconciliation and unity. Central to this mission is the intentional transformation of all structures, systems, and practices in the church and elsewhere that perpetuate the evil of racism. Racism in the church subverts the promise of new life in Christ for everyone. Racism stains the church and contradicts the reconciling power of Christ's death and resurrection. Racism is totally inconsistent with the gospel and therefore must be confronted and eradicated. Having entered into covenant with each other to root out the sin of racism in very specific, personal, and corporate ways, we, the bishops of the Episcopal Church, invite all members of our dioceses to join us in this mission of justice, reconciliation, and unity. This will be an expression of our commitment to the fundamental covenant each of us entered into at the moment of our baptism." End quote. So with apologies to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream. My dream is the end to racism and the just, full, and loving embrace of all that is other, all tribes and languages and people and nations. Diversity of, after all, is the most beautiful and precious gift of God. That is my dream. That needs to be our dream. May God give us the will to engage in this task together and the power and grace to accomplish it. Amen. Thank you. A couple extra. The chair recognizes the secretary for announcements.
A set of Ford keys with a fob was found by the coffee and pastries this morning, and it can be picked up at registration. If you have reserved a boxed lunch, it may be picked up in the main corridor outside the exhibit area. There are tables set up in the exhibit area for dining, or you may return to this room to enjoy your lunch. In the exhibit area, please take some time during the lunch break to visit our various exhibitors. There's some great informational displays and an opportunity to support and learn about some of the wonderful organizations and ministries in our diocese. The silent auction bids for the Whitaker Institute items will close at 1 p.m. There are several special lunchtime gatherings, and volunteers will help you find your way. The clergy spouse partner lunch is in the choral room. The question and answer with the investment committee is in the Amethyst room, and the Race Relations and Reconciliation Task Force is in the Emerald room. And the members of the Race Relations and Diversity Task Force are welcome to pick up your lunch and join in discussion with Heidi Kim in the Emerald room. The youth and young adults, the Yaya Ministries, will be meeting with Darius Hillman for lunch in the lunchroom. So just find that particular group. If you are attending the Investment Committee lunch or the Race Relations and Reconciliation Task Force and have reserved a box lunch, please pick up your lunch in the corridor, then head for your designated meeting room. Also, please remember that there are evaluations in your form or in your packet please be sure to fill those forms out sometime this afternoon before you leave. I believe that is all announcements at this time.
Thank you. Let us stand for midday prayer. As we pause to feed our bodies in the middle of the day, we pause also to feed our souls by vowing again to live faithfully. My grace is sufficient for you. Grant us, O God, not to be anxious about earthly things, but to love things heavenly. And even now, while we are placed among things that are passing away, to hold fast to those that shall endure, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Julia? Peace before us, peace behind us, peace under our feet, peace within us, peace over us, let all around us be peace. Light before us, light behind us, light under our feet, light within us, light over us, let all around us be loved. Love before us, love behind us, love under our feet, love within us, love over us, let all around us be loved. Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ under our feet, Christ within us, Christ over us, let all around us be Christ. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom. My speech and my proclamation were not with the persuasiveness of wisdom, but with the demonstration of the Spirit of power, so that your faith may not rest on human wisdom, but on the power of God. Whenever I am weak, then I am strong. How do we find strength manifested in weakness? In our daily tasks,
God surrounds us.
In our successes and failures,
God surrounds us.
In our joys and sorrows,
God surrounds us.
With the healing of our world,
God surrounds us.
We pray for all who celebrate or seek or need God's love. And we pray for those who have died. Pat Carson, Lynn Chockley, Constance Davidson, Ivan Estes, the Reverend Les Harding, the Reverend Karen Johans, the Reverend T. Herbert Johnson, the Reverend Charles Sturm, Susan Suter, the Right Reverend Oris Walker, the Reverend Deacon Bill Bones. Rest eternal grant to them, O Lord, and let light perpetual shine upon them. May their souls and the souls of all the departed rest in peace. Amen. As we continue our day, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. O Holy One, we keep still. We listen. We hear you say, I am your strength. And we say to you, you are our Redeemer. Amen. My grace is sufficient for you.
For power is made perfect in weakness.
Convention stands in recess until 1:45 promptly. Thank you.